Clara Whitmore pressed her frozen hands against her empty stomach and waited to die. The Wyoming snow had soaked through her thin coat hours ago. The man who was supposed to be her husband had taken one look at her and said, "I ordered a wife, not a ghost." Then 7 children appeared through the blizzard. The smallest one, barely 6 years old, tugged at Clara's frozen sleeve and whispered, "Are you the lady who's gonna be our new mama? Stay with me until the end. Subscribe and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin." The train had been gone for 3 hours. Clara Whitmore sat on the wooden bench outside the Bitter Creek station, her carpet bag clutched against her chest like a shield. The snow fell thick and relentless, coating her shoulders, her hair, the hem of her dress. She'd stopped shivering about an hour ago. That was probably a bad sign. She knew she should move, find shelter, beg someone for help. But her legs wouldn't obey, and her mind kept circling back to the same moment, playing it over and over, like a song she couldn't stop hearing. Thomas Garrett's face, when he'd seen her step off the train. The way his jaw had tightened. The way he'd looked her up and down, then turned to the station master and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "There's been a mistake. I ordered a wife, not a walking corpse." Clara had tried to speak, tried to explain that yes, she was thinner than her photograph, that she'd been ill, that grief had hollowed her out after her family died in the fire. But Thomas Garrett hadn't waited for explanations. "Stage leaves in 2 hours, he'd said without looking at her. "Be on it." Then he'd climbed back into his wagon with his 7 children staring at her through the canvas cover, and he'd driven away without a backward glance. The stage had come and gone. Clara hadn't boarded it. Where would she go back to Ohio? To the ashes of her family's farm? To the nothing that waited for her there? So she'd stayed. Sat on this bench as the afternoon turned to evening, as the temperature dropped, as the snow piled up around her feet. She'd stayed because moving required deciding, and she had no decisions left. "Ma'am." The voice came from somewhere to her right. Small, uncertain. Clara forced her eyes open. A little girl stood in front of her, knee-deep in snow. Dark curly hair escaping from beneath a wool cap. Gray eyes that seemed too old for her young face. She couldn't have been more than 6. "Ma'am, are you the lady from the train?" Clara's voice came out as a croak. "Yes." "The one Papa said couldn't stay." The words hit like a fist. Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, that's me." The girl tilted her head, studying Clara with unsettling intensity. "You look cold." "I am cold." "You should come inside somewhere." "I don't have anywhere to go." The girl considered this. Then she stepped closer, her small mitten-covered hand reaching out to touch Clara's frozen fingers. "Your hands are like ice." "I know. Papa says people die when they get too cold. Their hearts stop." "Your papa is right." "Are you gonna die?" Clara looked at this child, this strange, serious little creature who'd appeared out of the blizzard like something from a fairy tale. The honest answer was yes. Probably. If she stayed here much longer, she would die, and part of her thought that might be easier than trying to figure out what came next. But she couldn't say that to a child. "I don't know," Clara said instead. The girl's grip tightened on her fingers. "I don't want you to die. You don't even know me. I know you came a long way on a train. I know Papa was mean to you. I know you're sitting in the snow all alone and nobody's helping you." The girl's chin lifted. "That ain't right." Clara felt something crack in her chest, something she'd thought was frozen solid. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucy. Lucy Garrett." Garrett, of course. This was Thomas Garrett's daughter, one of the 7 children she'd glimpsed in the wagon, one of the 7 reasons she'd answered his advertisement in the first place. "That's a pretty name," Clara managed. "My mama picked it, before she died." "I'm sorry about your mama." "Me too." Lucy scuffed her boot in the snow. She's been gone 2 years now. Papa says she's in heaven, but I think she's probably cold up there too. Heaven's up high where the clouds are, and clouds are cold. A laugh escaped Clara before she could stop it. It sounded rusty, unused. Lucy smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious little face. You laughed. I did. Papa never laughs anymore, not since Mama died. Grief does that to people. What's grief? It's the feeling you get when someone you love goes away and doesn't come back. Lucy nodded slowly. I got that. It lives in my chest like a rock. She pressed her mitten against her heart. Right here. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of this child. I got that too, she whispered. Same place. They looked at each other, woman and girl, both carrying stones in their chests that no one else could see. Lucy, Lucy Garrett, where in tarnation? A new voice cut through the snow, male, deep, angry. Clara's stomach dropped. Thomas Garrett emerged from the white curtain of the blizzard, his long coat dusted with snow, his face a thundercloud. He stopped short when he saw them. Lucy, get away from her. But Papa, now. Lucy didn't move. Instead, she stepped in front of Clara, her small body positioned between the woman and her father like a shield. She's freezing, Papa. She's been sitting here for hours, and nobody helped her, and her hands are like ice, and I think she might die. Thomas Garrett's jaw worked. His eyes flicked from his daughter to Clara, taking in the snow on her shoulders, the blue tinge to her lips, the way her whole body had begun to shake again. That ain't my concern. You made it your concern when you left her here. The words came from behind Thomas, a boy's voice cracking with adolescence. A moment later, a tall, thin youth appeared at Thomas's elbow. 14, maybe 15. Same dark hair as Lucy, same gray eyes, but with a harder edge. William, Thomas said, a warning in his voice. No, Pa. Lucy's right. William stepped forward, his young face set with determination. You brought her all the way from Ohio. You sent for her. You made her promises in those letters. And then you took one look at her and sent her away like she was a horse that didn't meet your standards. Watch your tone, boy. I'm watching a woman freeze to death, Pa. That's what I'm watching. More children appeared through the snow. One by one they materialized like ghosts. A girl about 12 with braids and a fierce expression. Twin boys around 10, identical in their worn coats. A younger boy clutching a rag doll. And a toddler carried by the oldest girl, a young woman barely into her 20s. 7 children. 7 pairs of eyes, all fixed on Clara, with varying degrees of curiosity and pity. Children, get in the wagon, Thomas ordered. Nobody moved. I said, We heard you, Papa. The oldest girl stepped forward, shifting the toddler to her hip. We just ain't listening. Harriet? That woman is dying, Papa, right here in front of us. And you want us to just drive away. Leave her here like she's nothing. Thomas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Clara could see the war playing out across his face, pride against conscience, stubbornness against compassion. I can't take her in. We got no room for a stranger who looks like death walking. Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. She forced herself to stand, swaying slightly, her legs screaming in protest. That's what you said, isn't it? That I look like death walking. Thomas met her eyes for the first time since he'd rejected her at the station. I said what I meant. Then you meant to be cruel. Clara lifted her chin, drawing on reserve she didn't know she had. I traveled 3 weeks to get here, Mr. Garrett. I spent every penny I had on train fare. I left behind a grave with my parents' names on it and a burned-out farm that used to be my home. I came here because your advertisement said you needed a wife to help raise your children after your own wife passed. I came here thinking I might find a purpose again, a reason to keep living. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. You have every right to reject me. I am thin. I am tired. I probably do look like death walking. But you don't have the right to leave me here to die and then tell your children it ain't your concern. You made it your concern when you sent for me, and now you get to decide what kind of man you are. Silence. The snow fell between them like a curtain. Lucy broke it first. Papa? Her small voice trembled. Please, she's got the same rock in her chest that we got. I can tell. She lost people too. Thomas Garrett stared at his youngest daughter. Something shifted in his face. How do you know that? Because her eyes look like yours, empty and full at the same time. Clara watched the words hit Thomas like a physical blow. His whole body flinched. Papa. This time it was William, his voice quieter. Ma wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't. Don't you dare. She took in every stray that wandered onto our land. Every orphaned calf, every injured bird, every traveler who needed shelter. She used to say, that's how you measure a person's worth, not by what they keep, but by what they give. Your mother was a saint, Thomas said roughly. I ain't. No, Harriet agreed. Harriet, you ain't. But you're also not a man who lets women freeze to death in the snow. That's not who you are, Pa. That's not who Ma raised you to be. Thomas stood frozen, his breath coming in white clouds, his children arranged around him like a jury. Then the toddler in Harriet's arms reached toward Clara with chubby fingers and said clear as a bell, Lady Cold, lady come home. Something broke in Thomas Garrett's face. He turned away, his shoulders rigid, his hands still clenched. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, get her in the wagon, before she freezes solid. Lucy let out a shriek of joy. Really? She can stay. She can really stay. I said, get her in the wagon, didn't say nothing about staying. But his voice had lost its edge, and when he finally looked at Clara again, she saw something in his expression that might have been shame. Can you walk? Clara wasn't sure. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but she nodded. Then walk. He didn't offer to help her, didn't extend a hand or an arm, but he waited while she gathered her carpet bag, waited while she took one shaking step and then another. William appeared at her elbow, silent and steady, offering support without making a show of it. Thank you, Clara whispered. Don't thank us yet, William said quietly. Pa agreed to get you out of the snow. That don't mean he agreed to anything else. Clara glanced at Thomas Garrett's rigid back as he strode toward the wagon. I know. He's not a bad man. He's just broken. We all are since Ma died. I understand broken. William looked at her, then really looked and nodded slowly. Yeah, I reckon you do. The wagon was large, but crowded. 7 children took up most of the space, even with the older ones pressed together to make room. Clara found herself wedged between Lucy and the 12-year-old, with braids whose name turned out to be Abigail. I'm Abby, the girl said without preamble. That's William, he's 15. Harriet's 21, she's been running things since Ma passed. The twins are Samuel and Daniel, they're 10. The little one with the doll is George, he's 4. And the baby is Rose, she's 2. Rose just started walking, Lucy added. She falls down a lot. She's learning, Abby said defensively. Everybody falls when they're learning. Clara let the children's chatter wash over her, too exhausted to contribute. Her body was warming slowly, painfully, as the wagon's canvas cover blocked the worst of the wind. Someone had tucked a horse blanket around her shoulders. She didn't know who. Thomas drove in silence, his back a wall between him and his passengers. It's 5 miles to the ranch, Harriet said quietly, settling onto the bench across from Clara with Rose in her lap. You should try to rest. I don't think I can. Try anyway. You look like you ain't slept in days. I haven't. Harriet studied her with eyes that were too knowing for her young age. The fire. That's how you lost your family. Clara nodded, her throat tight. Pa's brother died in a fire. Before we were born. That's probably why. Harriet trailed off, glancing toward her father's back. Why he reacted so strongly to my appearance. Something like that. He don't talk about it, but Ma told me once. Said he never got over the guilt of not being there. Clara filed that information away. It didn't excuse Thomas Garrett's cruelty, but it explained something. People who carried guilt often lashed out at reminders of their own failures. Are you going to be our new mama? The question came from George, who had abandoned his rag doll to stare at Clara with enormous brown eyes. I don't know, sweetheart. I want you to be. Our mama went to heaven, and now Papa's sad all the time, and nobody sings anymore. Clara's heart clenched. Your mama sang to you. Every night, before bed. But then she got sick and stopped singing, and then she went away. Lucy leaned against Clara's arm. I still remember her voice. Just a little bit. It was soft, like snow falling. Mine was too, Clara heard herself say. My mother's voice. She used to sing while she cooked, hymns mostly, and sometimes songs from her grandmother's country. Where's that? Ireland. Is that far? Very far. Across an ocean. The children peppered her with questions about Ireland, about oceans, about her mother's songs. Clara answered as best she could, drawing on memories she'd buried, deep memories that hurt less when shared with these curious, hungry young minds. She didn't notice when Thomas turned to listen. Didn't notice the way his rigid shoulders slowly softened. Didn't notice the look that passed between Harriet and William, a look of cautious hope. The wagon rolled on through the snow, carrying its cargo of broken people toward a ranch that had forgotten how to be a home. And Clara Whitmore, who had been ready to die on a frozen bench in Wyoming, felt something stir in her chest. Not hope. Not yet. Something smaller. A willingness to see what came next. The Garrett Ranch appeared through the snow like a shadow taking form. A two-story house with a wide porch, a barn, a stable, several outbuildings. Everything looked sturdy but tired. Paint peeling, fences sagging. The accumulated neglect of a household without a woman's touch. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, his back still to his passengers. Miss Whitmore. Clara straightened. Yes. You'll have the spare room upstairs. Third door on the right. Harriet will show you. You'll get one meal tonight and breakfast in the morning. After that, we'll discuss arrangements. His voice was clipped businesslike, but he'd used her name. That was something. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Don't thank me. Thank my children. They're the ones who wouldn't let me leave you behind. He climbed down from the wagon and strode toward the house without looking back. Lucy's hand found Clara's in the darkness. He's not really mean, she whispered. He's just scared. Scared of what? Loving somebody again. Because what if they leave too? Clara looked at this 6-year-old child who understood loss better than most adults ever would. That's a scary thing to be scared of, Clara said. I know. I'm scared of it too. Lucy squeezed her hand. But I'm more scared of being alone. The children tumbled out of the wagon in a chaotic rush. Samuel and Daniel immediately started throwing snowballs at each other. George chased after them, shrieking with laughter. Rose clung to Harriet's neck, watching everything with wide eyes. Come on, Harriet said to Clara. Let's get you inside before Pa changes his mind. The house was cold and dark. Harriet lit lamps while William built up the fire. Clara stood in the entryway, dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor, feeling like an intruder. The space was large but sparse. Worn furniture, bare walls. No curtains on the windows. No flowers, no decorations, no softness anywhere. It was a house that had forgotten how to be a home. It used to be nicer, Abby said, appearing at Clara's elbow. When Ma was alive, there were quilts on all the chairs and pictures on the walls, and it always smelled like bread baking. What happened to all of it? Pa put it away, said it hurt too much to look at. Clara understood that impulse. After the fire, she'd wanted to destroy every photograph, every memento, everything that reminded her of what she'd lost. But she'd kept them instead. Kept them because destroying them would have meant destroying the last pieces of her family. "Your room's this way." Harriet led her up the stairs, Rose still on her hip. "It's small, but it's warm when the stove's going. There's quilts in the trunk, and a washstand in the corner." The room was indeed small, just big enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. But it was clean, and the quilts in the trunk looked handmade and warm. "This was the guest room," Harriet said. "Ma's sisters used to visit sometimes, before." Before. Such a small word for such enormous loss. "Thank you, Harriet. For everything." Harriet shifted Rose to her other hip. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why'd you come here, really?" A mail-order bride from back east, answering an advertisement for a widower with 7 children on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. Most women would have run the other direction. Clara sat down heavily on the bed. The exhaustion was catching up to her now, making her bones feel like lead. "Because I had nowhere else to go. Because my family's dead, and my home burned down, and staying in Ohio meant drowning in grief every single day. Because I thought, maybe if I could be useful to someone, if I could matter to someone, I might find a reason to keep breathing." Harriet was quiet for a moment. "That's honest. I don't have the energy for anything else. Pa won't make this easy, you know. He's been fighting the whole world since Ma died. Fighting the ranch, fighting the bank, fighting himself. He won't just accept you because his children threw a fit in the snow." "I know. So why stay? Why not take the stage in the morning and find somewhere easier?" Clara looked at this young woman who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd been running a household of 7 children while her father drowned in grief. "Because easy isn't what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a purpose, for people who need me. And from what I've seen," Clara gestured vaguely at the sparse room, the tired house, "you need someone, whether your father wants to admit it or not." Harriet's expression flickered hope and skepticism, warring for dominance. "One night," she said finally. "That's what Pa agreed to. We'll see what tomorrow brings." "We will." Harriet turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Miss Whitmore, Lucy's never warmed up to anyone that fast, not since Ma, and Lucy's got good instincts about people." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the stairs. Clara sat alone in the small room, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Children's voices drifting up from below. The crackle of the fire. The wind howling outside. She should sleep. Her body was screaming for rest. But instead she reached into her carpet bag and pulled out the only photograph she'd saved from the fire. Her parents and her brother Thomas taken the summer before they died. "I'm sorry," she whispered to their faces. "I'm sorry I survived when you didn't. I'm sorry I'm here trying to live when you're gone." She pressed the photograph to her chest and let the tears come. She'd thought she was done crying. Thought she'd emptied herself of tears during the long train ride west. But these were different tears, not just grief, but something else. Fear. Hope. The terrible vulnerability of wanting something again after losing everything. "Please." She prayed to no one in particular. "Please let me find a home here. Please let me matter to someone. Please give me a reason to keep going." The snow continued to fall outside her window. And somewhere in the house below, 7 children were dreaming of a mother they'd lost, and hoping for one they might find. Morning came too soon. Clara woke to the sound of children arguing downstairs and the smell of something burning. She'd slept in her clothes too exhausted to change, and now every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she forced herself upright. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The rejection. The snow. Lucy's small hand in hers. Thomas Garrett's grudging permission to stay one night. One night was over. Clara splashed cold water on her face from the washstand, ran her fingers through her tangled hair, and made herself as presentable as possible given the circumstances. Then she squared her shoulders and went downstairs to face whatever came next. The kitchen was chaos. Harriet stood at the stove, frantically scraping something black from a pan, while Rose screamed in her high chair. The twins were wrestling over a piece of bread. George sat under the table with his rag doll crying quietly. Abby was trying to braid Lucy's hair while Lucy squirmed and complained. William was nowhere to be seen. And Thomas Garrett sat at the head of the table staring into a cup of coffee like it held the answers to all life's questions, seemingly oblivious to the pandemonium around him. "Let me help," Clara said. Harriet spun around, relief flooding her face. "The eggs burned. I was trying to feed Rose and watch the stove and... I've got it." Clara crossed to the stove, took the ruined pan from Harriet's hands, and set it aside. "Where are the eggs?" "Pantry. Second shelf." Clara found them and cracked 6 into a clean pan, adding a bit of butter from the crock on the counter. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of cooking for her own family. "Samuel Daniel, stop fighting this instant," she said without turning around. "There's plenty of bread for everyone." The twins froze, staring at her. "How'd you know our names?" Samuel asked. "Abby told me last night. Now sit down properly and wait for breakfast like civilized human beings." "You ain't our ma," Daniel muttered. "You can't tell us what to do." "Daniel." Thomas's voice cut through the noise. "Sit down." The boys sat. Clara kept cooking, aware of Thomas's eyes on her back. She scrambled the eggs, found plates in the cabinet, and began serving, while Harriet finally managed to calm Rose with a piece of soft bread to gum. "George, sweetheart, come out from under the table," Clara said gently. "Breakfast is ready." The 4-year-old peeked out, his face tear-streaked. "I miss Mama." Clara's heart clenched. She knelt down to his level, ignoring the protests from her stiff joints. "I know you do. Missing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world. But your mama wouldn't want you to hide under the table and cry, would she? She'd want you to eat your breakfast and grow up big and strong." George considered this. "She used to make faces in my eggs, with bacon." Faces. Eyes and a mouth, so the eggs looked happy. Clara glanced at the plain scrambled eggs she'd made. "I didn't know that. But maybe tomorrow, if I'm still here, you can teach me how." George's face brightened slightly. "Really? Really?" He crawled out from under the table and let Clara lift him into his chair. When she turned around, she found Thomas watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore," he said gruffly. "Eat." Clara sat. She was hungrier than she'd realized, and the eggs, plain as they were, tasted like the best thing she'd eaten in weeks. The meal passed in relative quiet, the children too busy eating to argue. When the plates were empty, Harriet began clearing while the younger ones scattered to their morning chores. Thomas remained seated, his coffee cup empty now, his jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." Clara nodded and followed him out of the kitchen through the main room and into a small study off the hallway. It was clearly his space papers piled on a desk, a gun rack on the wall, a single chair that looked like it had seen better days. Thomas closed the door and turned to face her. "I owe you an apology." Whatever Clara had expected, it wasn't that. "What I said at the station. How I treated you." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "It wasn't right. My children made that clear last night in ways I ain't likely to forget any time soon." "Mr. Garrett." "Let me finish." He held up a hand. "I sent for a mail-order bride because this ranch is falling apart and my children need a mother and I can't do it all alone anymore. That's the truth. But when I saw you step off that train..." He stopped, his jaw working. "You look like her," he said finally. "My wife, Martha. Same brown hair, same thin frame, same... something in your eyes. And for a second it felt like she was coming back from the dead and I couldn't..." His voice cracked. "I couldn't bear it." Clara stood very still. So I said the cruelest thing I could think of because I wanted you to go away. I wanted to stop feeling what I was feeling, and I nearly let you freeze to death because I was too much of a coward to face my own grief." Thomas met her eyes, and she saw the shame there, the self-loathing. "That ain't an excuse. There ain't no excuse. I'm trying to explain." "I understand grief, Mr. Garrett," Clara said quietly. "I watched my parents and brother burn to death. I know what it does to a person, how it makes you want to destroy anything that reminds you of what you lost." Thomas flinched. "I didn't know. About the fire. I didn't tell you. In the letters I just said my family had passed. I didn't—" She swallowed hard. "I didn't want to explain." They stood in heavy silence for a long moment. "What do you want, Miss Whitmore?" Thomas asked finally. "Truth now. No pretty words. What do you want from being here?" Clara thought about the question, really thought. "I want to be useful," she said. "I want to matter to someone. I want to wake up in the morning with a reason to get out of bed. I want—" Her voice wavered. "I want a home. A real home with people who need me. Even if those people are a broken-down rancher and 7 children who don't know how to be a family anymore. Especially then." Thomas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once sharply. "All right. Here's what I'm offering. Room and board $5 a month. You help Harriet with the house and the younger children. You cook, clean, mend clothes, whatever needs doing. This ain't a marriage proposal, I want to be clear about that. It's a job, nothing more." "I understand." "Good." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "My children, they've already lost one mother. If you're gonna leave, leave now, today, before they get attached. Because if you stay and then go, it'll break them worse than anything I could do." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I'm not planning to leave, Mr. Garrett. Plans change. Sometimes. But I've got nowhere else to go and nothing to go back to. This is it for me. This ranch, these children, this life. I'm not looking for better options because there aren't any." Something flickered in Thomas's face. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of belief. "We'll see," he said. "Actions speak louder than words." He left without another word. Clara stood alone in the study, her heart pounding. She'd been given a chance. A fragile, conditional chance, but a chance nonetheless. She intended to make the most of it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. She learned that Lucy liked her eggs soft, Daniel liked his crispy, and George wouldn't eat anything unless someone sat with him and told him stories. She learned that Rose was cutting teeth and screamed at unpredictable intervals. She learned that Harriet was exhausted beyond words and grateful beyond expression for any help Clara could provide. She learned that Thomas Garrett watched her constantly, as if waiting for her to fail. A week passed. Then 2. Clara threw herself into the work with a desperation that bordered on obsessive. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed. She mended clothes that had been waiting for repair for months. She reorganized the pantry, beat the dust from the rugs, and somehow managed to coax the temperamental stove into producing meals that didn't burn. The children warmed to her slowly, each in their own way. Lucy became her shadow, following her from room to room, peppering her with questions about everything from the color of the ocean to why the sky was blue. George started bringing his rag doll to her for checkups, declaring that Clara was a much better doctor than Harriet. The twins tested her constantly, playing pranks and pushing boundaries, but their mischief softened when Clara laughed at their jokes instead of scolding them. Abby was warier, watching Clara with suspicious eyes, but she began asking for help with her sewing when she thought no one else was paying attention. William kept his distance, polite but reserved. He'd been the man of the house for 2 years, and Clara sensed he wasn't sure how to feel about her presence. Was she help competition? A threat to the role he'd carved out for himself, Harriet was the easiest. She was simply grateful. Grateful for someone to share the burden. Grateful for a few hours of sleep. grateful for adult conversation that didn't revolve around cattle prices or broken fences. And Thomas. Thomas remained a wall. He came in for meals, grunted his thanks, and retreated to the ranch work that consumed his days. He didn't speak to Clara beyond necessities. Didn't acknowledge the changes she was making to his home. Didn't show any sign that he noticed her at all. Until the night everything changed. It was nearly midnight. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair by the fire, a basket of mending in her lap, exhausted from a day that had started at 4 a.m. She woke to the sound of the front door opening and closing and footsteps crossing to the kitchen. Thomas. She should have stayed quiet, should have pretended to still be asleep. But instead, she gathered the mending and followed him. He was standing at the sink, his back to her, his shoulders shaking. Clara stopped in the doorway. Thomas Garrett, the stern and unyielding rancher, who hadn't shown a moment of weakness since she'd arrived, was crying. She should leave. Give him privacy. This wasn't her place, wasn't her business. But her feet wouldn't move. Mr. Garrett. He stiffened. Didn't turn around. Go to bed, Miss Whitmore. Are you all right? I said go to bed. Clara hesitated. Then she walked to the cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey she'd found while organizing, and poured 2 glasses. She set one on the counter near Thomas's hand and sat down at the table with the other. I ain't gonna talk about it, Thomas said roughly. I didn't ask you to. He turned, then his face tear-streaked, his eyes red. Then what are you doing? Sitting, drinking. You're welcome to join me or not. Either way, I'm not going to bed yet. Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he grabbed the glass, drained it in one swallow, and sat down heavily across from her. Today would have been her birthday, he said. Martha's. She would have been 38. Clara said nothing, just waited. I forgot. God help me, I almost forgot. Spent all day mending fences in the north pasture, and it wasn't until I came home and saw Lucy looking at that photograph, the one in the parlor, that I remembered. Grief does strange things to memory. I'm forgetting her. Little by little I'm losing her. Thomas's voice cracked. The sound of her laugh, the way she smelled, the feel of her hand in mine. It's all fading, and I can't stop it, and I hate myself for it. That's not forgetting. That's healing. Thomas's head snapped up. Healing losing her feels like healing to you. The sharp edges of grief get softer over time. It doesn't mean you love her less. It means you're learning to carry the weight of loss without it crushing you. Clara took a sip of her whiskey. My mother's been gone 4 months. There are days I can't remember her face without looking at a photograph. Does that mean I've stopped loving her? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You talk like you understand. I told you. I watched my family die. Tell me. The words came out rough, almost a demand. Tell me what happened. Clara set down her glass. She'd never told anyone the full story. Not the neighbors who'd found her screaming in the yard. Not the preacher who'd conducted the funeral. Not anyone. But something about this moment, the darkness, the shared grief, the whiskey warming her blood, loosened her tongue. His name was Jacob Crane. He wanted our land. My father refused to sell. Crane made threats, but Papa didn't take them seriously. Said no man would actually... She stopped, swallowed hard. He was wrong. Thomas waited. I was in town when it happened, delivering pies to the church social. I came home to find the barn on fire. I could hear them screaming inside. My father, my mother, my brother Tommy. Crane had locked them in and set the blaze. Dear God. I tried to get to them, burned my hands trying to break down the door. Clara looked down at her palms at the scars that were still pink and tender. But it was too hot, too fast. By the time the neighbors came, it was over. And this Crane? Gone. Disappeared that night. The sheriff said there wasn't enough evidence to prove he'd done it. Said it could have been an accident. Clara's voice hardened. It wasn't an accident. I saw him riding away, saw his face in the firelight, but my word against his money and connections. It was nothing. Thomas's hands clenched into fists on the table. So I ran, changed my name, became a mail-order bride because it was the only way I could afford to get far enough away that he'd never find me. Because the newspapers reported that the whole family died in the fire, and I wanted him to believe that, wanted to disappear completely. Does anyone else know here? Clara shook her head. Just you. Why tell me? She met his eyes. Because you asked. Because we're both carrying losses that feel impossible to survive. Because I'm tired of pretending I'm not terrified every single day. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her scarred hand with his. He won't find you here. And if he does, he'll have to go through me. It wasn't a declaration of love. Wasn't even particularly warm. But it was the first real connection Clara had felt since arriving at this ranch, and it hit her harder than she expected. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas pulled his hand back, looking almost embarrassed by the gesture. Get some sleep, Miss Whitmore. Morning comes early. He left the kitchen without looking back. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked, even if it hadn't fallen. Clara sat alone in the dark kitchen for a long time, her scarred hand pressed against her heart. 3 weeks turned into 4. Clara settled deeper into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned which children needed firm discipline and which needed gentle encouragement. She learned that the key to William's trust was asking his advice, treating him like the adult he was trying so hard to become. She learned that Abby's wariness was actually fear of loving someone who might leave. She learned that Thomas Garrett, beneath his gruff exterior, was watching her with something that looked less like suspicion and more like hope. The night they'd talked in the kitchen had changed things. He still didn't speak much, but his silence felt different now. Less hostile. More comfortable. He started lingering after meals. Started asking her opinion on small matters. Started saying, thank you, like he meant it. And then came the day Lucy fell through the ice. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard Abby screaming. She dropped the bowl she was holding and ran, her heart pounding. The pond behind the barn. The children had been warned 1,000 times to stay away from it in winter. But children were children, and curiosity was stronger than caution. Lucy was in the water up to her chest, her small hands scrabbling at the ice edge, her lips already turning blue. William was lying flat on the ice, reaching for her, but he couldn't get close enough without risking falling in himself. Abby was crying. The twins were frozen with shock. George clutched his rag doll and wailed. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the rope hanging on the barn wall, tied one end around her waist, and shoved the other end into William's hands. Don't let go. Miss Clara, you can't. But she was already moving, crawling across the ice on her belly, distributing her weight, praying the surface would hold. Lucy. Lucy, look at me. The child's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. Miss Clara, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. I know, sweetheart. It's okay. I'm coming. The ice groaned beneath her. Clara kept moving. 5 feet. 4. 3. She could see the terror in Lucy's eyes. The way her small fingers were losing their grip. Reach for me, Lucy. Can you do that? Reach as far as you can. Lucy stretched out one shaking hand. Clara lunged forward, caught it, and pulled. The ice cracked. For one horrifying moment, Clara felt herself sliding, felt the cold water rushing up to meet her. But then the rope went taut, and William was pulling, and she was dragging Lucy with her, and they were sliding backward across the ice away from the hole. They hit solid ground in a tangle of limbs and soaking wet clothes. Lucy was sobbing, clinging to Clara like she'd never let go. You saved me. You saved me. Clara held her tight, her own body shaking now with cold and delayed terror. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you. What the hell happened? Thomas's voice thundered across the yard. He'd been in the far pasture when the screaming started, but he must have ridden like the devil himself to get here so fast. He took in the scene, his daughter soaking wet and blue-lipped. Clara, not much better, the hole in the ice still visible behind them, and his face went white. "Lucy, Papa." Lucy released Clara and ran to her father, throwing herself into his arms. Thomas caught her, lifted her, held her so tight, Clara thought he might break her in half. His eyes met Clara's over his daughter's head. "She fell through," Clara said, her teeth chattering. "I pulled her out." Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and strode toward the house, Lucy still in his arms, barking orders over his shoulder. "Harriet, hot water. William, blankets. Everyone inside. Now." Clara tried to stand, and found that her legs wouldn't hold her. The cold had seeped into her bones, and now that the emergency was over, her body was shutting down. Strong arms lifted her. Thomas had come back. He'd handed Lucy to Harriet and come back for Clara. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "No, you can't. Stop arguing." He carried her into the house, up the stairs, and into her room. Set her on the bed and began pulling blankets around her with hands that weren't quite steady. "You could have died," he said. "So could Lucy. You went onto ice that was already broken. You risked your life for my daughter." Clara looked up at him. His face was very close, his breath warm on her frozen cheeks. "She's not just your daughter anymore," Clara said. "She's mine too. They all are. I know you didn't ask for that. I know this was supposed to be just a job. But I love those children, Thomas. I love them like they're my own." Something broke in Thomas Garrett's eyes. Something that had been holding for 2 years, ever since he'd buried his wife, and closed off his heart. Clara. Her first name. The first time he'd ever used it. "I don't deserve." "Stop." She reached up and pressed her cold fingers against his lips. "Don't tell me what you deserve or don't deserve. Tell me what you want." Thomas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with tears he refused to shed. "I want you to stay. Not as hired help. Not as a mail-order bride I sent for because I needed someone to cook and clean. I want you to stay because this house isn't a home without you anymore. Because my children have started laughing again since you came. Because I have too." Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her frozen fingers. "Ask me properly then." Thomas took her hand. Her scarred, frozen hand. "Stay," he said. "Please. Stay forever." And Clara Whitmore, who had come to Wyoming ready to die, felt something bloom in her chest. Yes. The weeks after the ice turned everything golden. Clara woke each morning with Thomas's words echoing in her head. Stay forever. She'd said yes. She'd meant it. And somehow, impossibly, the walls around Thomas Garrett's heart had begun to crumble. He smiled now. Not often, not easily, but enough that the children noticed. "Papa laughed at breakfast," Lucy whispered to Clara one morning, her gray eyes wide with wonder. "He actually laughed. I forgot what that sounded like." Clara pulled the girl close and kissed the top of her head. "People heal, sweetheart, even when they think they can't. Did you heal him? No, he's healing himself. I'm just helping him remember how." The ranch transformed alongside its owner. Clara convinced Thomas to let her hang curtains in the main room. Then pictures. Then the quilts Martha had made, which had been stored in trunks for 2 years because looking at them hurt too much. She'd want her children to have these, Clara said gently when Thomas hesitated. She made them with love. That love shouldn't be hidden away. Thomas ran his rough fingers over the stitching his wife had done. His jaw worked, but he nodded. The children responded to the changes like flowers turning toward sun. Samuel and Daniel stopped fighting so much. Abby started singing while she worked. George abandoned his hiding spot under the table and began following Thomas around the ranch, peppering him with questions about cattle and horses and weather. Even William softened. He started calling Clara Miss Clara instead of Miss Whitmore. And once when she burned her hand on the stove, he'd been the first one there with cool water and a bandage. "Thank you," Clara had said, surprised by his gentleness. William had shrugged, looking embarrassed. "You've been good to us. Least I can do is return the favor." Harriet noticed everything. She pulled Clara aside one evening after the younger children had gone to bed. "He's different," she said without preamble. "Pa, he's becoming who he used to be, before Ma died." "Is that good?" "It's a miracle." Harriet's eyes glistened. "I'd given up hoping. We all had. And then you came." "I didn't do anything special. You stayed. After everything Pa said, after how he treated you, you stayed. You have no idea how rare that is." Clara thought about the frozen bench at the station, about how close she'd come to giving up entirely. "Sometimes staying is the only option," she said quietly, "when you've got nowhere else to go." "That's not why you stayed, and we both know it." Harriet squeezed her hand and left, and Clara stood alone in the kitchen, wondering when exactly this house had stopped feeling like refuge and started feeling like home. 5 weeks after the ice, Thomas asked Clara to walk with him. The children were in bed. The ranch was quiet. The moon hung full and bright over the Wyoming landscape. They walked in silence at first, their breath forming white clouds in the cold night air. Then Thomas stopped and turned to face her. "I've been thinking," he said. Clara's heart quickened. "About what?" "About what I asked you. To stay forever." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I shouldn't have said it like that. In the middle of an emergency, when you were half frozen and scared. It wasn't fair." Clara's stomach dropped. "Are you taking it back?" "No." Thomas stepped closer. "I'm saying it again. Properly this time." He took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm and steady. "Clara Whitmore, I ain't a man who knows how to speak pretty words. I ain't romantic or smooth or any of those things women want. But I know what I feel, and I feel like you've brought this family back from the dead. I feel like waking up matters again because you're here. I feel like maybe, just maybe, I could learn to be happy again." Clara couldn't breathe. "I'm asking you to marry me," Thomas said. "Not because I need a housekeeper or a mother for my children. Because I need you. Because I love you." The words hit her like a physical force. "You love me." "I do. God help me, I do. I know it's too soon. I know you might not feel the same way. But I couldn't go another day without telling you." Clara looked at this man who had rejected her so cruelly and then fought so hard to earn her trust. This man who had carried her when she couldn't walk and held her hand while she told him her darkest secrets. This man whose children had become her children, whose house had become her home. "I love you too," she whispered. Thomas's face transformed. The stern lines softened. The guarded eyes opened. "You do? I've loved you for weeks. I was afraid to say it." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd send me away again. That this was too good to be true. That something would happen to ruin everything." Thomas pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her cheek. "Nothing's going to ruin this," he said fiercely. "I won't let it." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly. But somewhere in the back of her mind a shadow stirred. A memory she'd tried to bury. A name she hadn't spoken since arriving in Wyoming. Jacob Crane. She pushed the thought away and let Thomas hold her under the moonlight. Everything was going to be fine. It had to be. The engagement brought chaos and joy in equal measure. Lucy shrieked so loudly when they told her that Rose started crying, and George covered his ears. Samuel and Daniel immediately began arguing about who would get to be ring-bearer. Abby burst into tears and had to be comforted by Harriet, who was crying too. William shook Thomas's hand solemnly and said, "About time, Pa. Watch yourself, boy. Just speaking the truth." The whole town seemed to know within days. Clara didn't understand how news traveled so fast in a place this isolated, but apparently the general store owner had seen Thomas buying fabric for a new dress and his wife had told the pastor's wife, who had told everyone else. Women Clara had never met started appearing at the ranch with casseroles and congratulations. Men she didn't know tipped their hats and called her Mrs. Garrett, even though the wedding hadn't happened yet. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "I don't know how to be a rancher's wife," Clara confessed to Harriet one afternoon. "I don't know how to fit into this community. What if they don't accept me?" "They already accept you," Harriet said. "You saved Lucy's life. That story's been told in every parlor and saloon in Bitter Creek. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do." "No, you did what a mother would do. That's different." Clara thought about those words for a long time. 6 weeks after the engagement, the first letter came. Thomas brought it in from town, his face troubled. "This was waiting at the post office, addressed to you." Clara took it with shaking hands. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but something about it made her blood run cold. She opened it. The words blurred in front of her eyes. "I know you're alive. I know where you are. Did you think you could hide forever? You can't run from what you saw. You can't escape what you know. I'm coming, Clara. And this time I'll finish what I started. No signature. No return address." But Clara knew. Jacob Crane had found her. "Clara." Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Clara, what is it? You've gone white as a sheet." She couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The letter trembled in her hands. Thomas took it from her, read it. His face went from concern to furious in the space of a heartbeat. "Who sent this?" "Jacob Crane." The name felt like poison on her tongue. "The man who killed my family. I thought you said he didn't know you survived." "He didn't. He does now." Thomas grabbed her shoulders. "Clara, look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his. "This man, this Crane. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." So she told him. Everything she'd told him before and more. The threats before the fire. The way Crane had smiled as he rode away from the flames. The corrupt sheriff who'd refused to investigate. The terror that had driven her west. "He's got money," Clara said. "Connections. He probably hired someone to track me down. I was careful, but you used your real name." "I had to, for the marriage license. I thought—" She laughed bitterly. "I thought I was safe here. I thought he'd never find me." Thomas's jaw was set like stone. "He won't touch you." "You don't understand. He killed my entire family. He burned them alive because my father wouldn't sell him some land. He's not a man who gives up. He's not a man who shows mercy." "Neither am I." Clara stared at him. "Thomas, I was a captain in the Union Army. I've killed men who deserved killing. I've protected what's mine against anyone who tried to take it." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "You're mine now, Clara. You and this family. And I will die before I let anyone hurt you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they filled her with fresh terror. "That's what I'm afraid of," she whispered. "That you'll die. That he'll take you too the way he took everyone else." "He won't. You don't know that. I know myself, and I know that man has no idea what he's walking into." Thomas pulled her close, and Clara clung to him, trying to believe that his strength would be enough. But in her heart, she knew Jacob Crane. Knew his patience, his cruelty, his absolute refusal to leave any witnesses alive. The shadow she'd been running from had finally caught up. 3 days later, a stranger rode into Bitter Creek. Clara heard about him from Harriet, who'd gone to town for supplies. A well-dressed man asking questions at the saloon. Questions about a woman from back east. Questions about the Garrett Ranch. "He knows," Clara said. "He's here." Thomas strapped on his gun belt. "Stay in the house. Keep the children inside. William, you're in charge. Pa, let me come with you." "No, your job is protecting your family. Understand?" William's young face hardened with determination. "Yes, sir." Thomas rode out alone. The hours that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She gathered the children in the main room, trying to keep them calm, while her own heart hammered against her ribs. "Why can't we go outside?" Samuel complained. "It ain't fair." "Because I said so." "But, Samuel," Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Not now." Lucy climbed into Clara's lap, her small body tense with fear she didn't fully understand. "Is something bad happening?" Clara stroked her hair. "Your papa's taking care of something. He'll be back soon." "Promise." Clara wanted to promise, wanted to say the words that would make everything better, but she couldn't lie to this child who trusted her so completely. "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so with all my heart." The sun was setting when Thomas returned. Clara heard his horse and ran to the window, her heart in her throat. He was alone, unharmed, but his face was grim. She met him at the door. "What happened?" "The stranger's gone. Rode out this afternoon. The bartender said he was asking about you specifically. Wanted to know if you were happy here, if you had protection." "What did the bartender tell him?" "The truth. That you're engaged to a former army captain with 7 children and half a dozen ranch hands. That this community protects its own." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't think it scared him off. I think he was just gathering information." "He's planning something." "Probably." Clara pressed her hands against her face, trying to think. "I should leave. If I go, he'll follow me. He'll leave you and the children alone." "No." "Thomas, listen to me." "No." He took her hands and pulled them away from her face. "You don't get to sacrifice yourself to protect us. That ain't how this works." "But if he hurts them?" "He won't, because we're going to be ready." "Ready how?" Thomas's eyes were cold, the soldier's eyes she'd glimpsed before. "I'm going to send word to some old friends, men I served with, men who know how to fight and ain't afraid to do it." He paused. "And I'm going to teach you to shoot." Clara blinked. "What?" "You heard me. If Crane comes for you, you need to be able to defend yourself. I won't always be there. You need to know how to fight back." She thought about her father, who had never learned to fight back, about her mother and brother, who had died because they couldn't escape a locked barn. "All right," she said. "Teach me." The lesson started the next morning. Thomas took her behind the barn with his spare revolver and a pile of empty cans. He showed her how to hold the gun, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Clara's first shot went wild, hitting nothing but air. "Again," Thomas said. She tried again, missed again, again. By the end of the first hour, Clara's arms ached, and her ears rang, and she'd only hit 1 can out of 20. "I'm terrible at this." "You're learning. Nobody's good at the start." "What if I'm not good enough when it matters?" Thomas came up behind her, adjusting her grip, his chest warm against her back. "Then you run. You hide. You stay alive. The gun is a last resort, not a first option. Understand?" "Yes." "Good. Again." They practiced every day for 2 weeks. Clara's aim improved slowly. She could hit the cans now most of the time if they weren't too far away. Thomas taught her how to reload quickly, how to clear a jam, how to shoot from different positions. "You're getting better," he said one afternoon, something like pride in his voice. "I'm getting good enough to not be helpless. That's not the same thing. Helpless women don't learn to shoot. They don't face their fears. They don't stay and fight for the people they love." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Clara Whitmore." "I don't feel brave." "That's because you don't know what brave means. It ain't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." Clara leaned into his touch. "What if I can't do what needs doing when the time comes?" "You will." "How do you know?" "Because you already have. You jumped into freezing water to save my daughter. You stayed when any sane person would have run. You're building a life in a place that started by rejecting you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. You've been brave since the moment I met you. You just don't see it yet." Clara kissed him then. Kissed him like she might never get another chance. Because deep in her bones, she knew the confrontation was coming. And she had no idea if any of them would survive it. The night before the attack, Clara had a dream. She was back in Ohio, standing in front of her family's barn. The flames were roaring, the heat unbearable, her parents' screams echoing through the smoke. She tried to run toward them, tried to save them, but her legs wouldn't move. And then Jacob Crane appeared beside her, his face illuminated by the firelight. "You can't save anyone," he said. "You couldn't save them. You won't save these new people you've attached yourself to. Everyone you love dies, Clara. That's just the way it is. No. You should have died with your family. That was my mistake. I won't make it again." Clara woke gasping, Thomas's arms already around her, pulling her close. "Nightmare," he murmured against her hair. "Yes. Same one. Always." He held her tighter. "He's not going to win, Clara. I promise you." Clara pressed her face against his chest and tried to believe him. But the dream stayed with her through the darkness, whispering its terrible prophecy. Everyone you love dies. Everyone you love dies. Everyone you love dies. She didn't sleep again that night. And when dawn came pink and peaceful over the Wyoming landscape, Clara watched it with the certain knowledge that everything was about to change. She just didn't know how much. The attack came 3 days later. Clara was in the kitchen teaching Lucy how to knead bread when she smelled it. Smoke. Not the comfortable wood smoke from their stove, but something sharper, more dangerous. She ran to the window. The barn was burning. "Thomas!" Clara screamed. "Thomas!" He burst through the back door, his face already blackened with soot. "Get the children. Get them into the root cellar. Now!" "The horses. Ezra's getting them out. Clara, move." She grabbed Lucy and ran. The girl was crying, asking questions Clara couldn't answer. George appeared from nowhere, clutching his rag doll, his eyes huge with terror. "What's happening? What's happening?" "Come with me, sweetheart. Quickly." Harriet was already gathering the younger ones. Samuel and Daniel, for once, weren't fighting, their faces pale with fear. Abby held Rose on her hip, the toddler wailing. "Where's William?" Clara demanded. "He went to help Pa." "No." Clara's blood ran cold. "He's supposed to stay with you." "He wouldn't listen. He said he's not a child anymore." Clara shoved Lucy toward Harriet. "Get them to the cellar. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Thomas." "Where are you going?" "To find William." She didn't wait for an answer. She ran. The yard was chaos. Smoke everywhere, burning her eyes, filling her lungs. She could hear men shouting, horses screaming, the terrible roar of flames consuming the barn Thomas had only just finished rebuilding. And then she saw them. Jacob Crane stood in the middle of the yard, calm as Sunday morning, a gun in his hand. Behind him, 3 men on horseback watched the destruction with satisfied smiles. Thomas was on his knees in front of Crane. Blood poured from a gash on his forehead. Crane's gun was pointed at his skull. William lay motionless on the ground nearby. "No!" The scream tore from Clara's throat. Crane turned, smiled. "There she is, the one who got away." Clara's legs kept moving even as her mind screamed at her to stop. She dropped to her knees beside William, her hands searching frantically for a pulse. There, weak but steady. He was alive. "He's just unconscious," Crane said casually. "My men got a little overeager. I told them I wanted everyone alive. For now." Clara looked up at him. This man who had haunted her nightmares for months. This monster who had murdered her family and burned everything she loved. He looked so ordinary. Average height, average build, well-dressed in a city suit that had no business being on a Wyoming ranch. Nothing about him suggested the evil that lived inside. "What do you want?" Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You know what I want." Crane gestured at Thomas with his gun. "I want what I've always wanted. Silence. You're the only witness to what happened in Ohio, the only loose end. I don't like loose ends. Killing me won't change what you did. No, but it'll make sure no one ever proves it. Crane's smile widened. I've worked too hard to build what I have. Land, money, political connections. I'm not going to let some farm girl from Ohio destroy all of it. Clara. Thomas's voice was rough with pain. Run. Get away. Touching, Crane said. But she won't run. Will you, Clara? Because if you do, I'll kill everyone on this ranch. The children in the cellar. The ranch hand in the barn. And your fiancé here slowly and painfully. Clara felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but something else was rising beneath it. Something cold and hard, and absolutely certain. Let them go, she said. I'll come with you. I'll sign whatever confession you want. I'll disappear forever, just let them live. Clara, no. Shut up. Crane pressed his gun harder against Thomas's head. The woman is speaking. Do we have a deal? Clara stood slowly, her hands raised. My life for theirs. Crane studied her with those cold, calculating eyes. You'd really die for these people. A man who rejected you and children that aren't yours. Yes. Why? Because they're my family, and family is worth dying for. For a moment, something flickered in Crane's expression. Confusion, maybe, or contempt for an emotion he couldn't understand. How sentimental. He gestured to one of his men. Tie her up. We'll take her back to Ohio, get that confession, and then... Pa! The scream came from the direction of the house. Clara whirled. Lucy was running across the yard toward them, her small legs pumping her face streaked with tears. No! Clara lunged toward her. Lucy, go back! Crane moved faster. He grabbed Lucy by the arm, yanking her up like a rag doll. Well, well, what have we here? Let her go! Thomas roared, trying to rise. One of Crane's men kicked him back down. Lucy struggled in Crane's grip, crying and hitting at him with her small fists. Let me go! Let me go! You're hurting me! Such a spirited child. Crane's voice was silk over steel. Reminds me of the boy. Your brother Clara. What was his name? Thomas, wasn't it? He fought too right up until the end. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could see was Lucy's terrified face and Crane's gun and the flames consuming everything behind them. Please, she whispered. Please. She's just a child. So is your brother. I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just let her go. Crane tilted his head, considering. Then he thrust Lucy toward one of his men. Hold her. If anyone moves, shoot the girl first. Lucy screamed as the man grabbed her. Clara's heart shattered. Now, Crane said, turning back to Clara. Where were we? Ah, yes. You were about to come with me willingly. Don't do it, Thomas said. Clara, don't. Crane struck him across the face with the gun. Thomas fell sideways, blood streaming from his temple. Papa! Lucy's scream was raw with terror. Clara felt something break loose inside her. The fear, the paralysis, the helplessness, all of it burned away in a surge of white-hot rage. This man had taken everything from her once. Her parents, her brother, her home, her sense of safety. He had left her with nothing but grief and nightmares, and the certainty that she would never feel whole again. And now he was trying to take everything she'd rebuilt. The man she loved, the children she'd claimed as her own, the life she'd fought so hard to create. No more. Clara's hand moved to her pocket. The small pistol Thomas had given her was still there, hidden in the folds of her dress. He'd told her to keep it always just in case. You want me to come with you? Clara said, her voice eerily calm. Yes. All right. She took a step forward. Let the girl go first. I don't think so. Then we have a problem. Clara's hand closed around the pistol grip. Because I'm not going anywhere until I know she's safe. Crane laughed. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you. She drew the pistol in one smooth motion, just as Thomas had taught her, and fired. The shot went wide. She'd been aiming for Crane's shoulder, but the bullet hit his arm instead. He howled in pain, dropping his gun. Everything happened at once. Thomas launched himself at the man nearest him, despite his injuries. The man holding Lucy loosened his grip in shock, and she bit down hard on his hand, then ran. Clara fired again, this time at the third man, who was raising his rifle toward her. She missed, but he dove for cover, giving her time to move. "Run!" she screamed at Lucy. "Run to the cellar!" Lucy ran. Clara turned back to Crane, who was struggling to retrieve his gun with his wounded arm. She aimed at him, her hands shaking now that the first burst of adrenaline was fading. "Don't move." Crane looked up at her, his face twisted with pain and fury. "You shot me. And I'll do it again if you move. You don't have the nerve. You killed my family." Clara's voice cracked. "You burned them alive. You think I don't have the nerve to put a bullet in your heart?" Clara. Thomas appeared beside her, bloody but standing. He'd taken down his opponent and retrieved the man's rifle. "I've got him. Go check on the children." "I'm not leaving you." "I'll be fine. Go." Clara hesitated. She didn't want to let Crane out of her sight. Didn't trust that this was really over. But then she heard Lucy screaming from somewhere near the house, and maternal instinct overrode everything else. She ran. The root cellar door was open. The children were gone. Clara's blood turned to ice. "Lucy, Harriet, where are you?" "Miss Clara." Abby's voice came from behind the house. "Over here." Clara rounded the corner and nearly collapsed with relief. All 7 children were there, huddled together against the wall. Lucy was crying in Harriet's arms. William was sitting up looking dazed but conscious. Samuel and Daniel flanked George protectively. Rose was screaming, but she was alive. They were all alive. "Is it over?" Harriet asked, her voice trembling. "Almost." Clara knelt and gathered as many of them as she could into her arms. "You're safe. You're all safe." "The bad man?" Lucy sobbed. "He grabbed me. He hurt Papa." "I know, sweetheart. But it's okay now. Your Papa's okay. Everything's going to be okay." She wasn't sure that was true, but it was what they needed to hear. A gunshot split the air. Clara's head snapped up. She pushed herself to her feet. "Stay here. William, watch them." "Miss Clara." But she was already running back toward the yard. She found Thomas standing over Crane's body. The other 2 men were on the ground nearby, one unconscious, one groaning in pain. Ezra had emerged from the burning barn and was holding a rifle on them. "Thomas." He turned. His face was unreadable. "He went for his gun," Thomas said flatly. "I had no choice." Clara looked at Jacob Crane, the man who had destroyed her life, the monster from her nightmares. He lay in the dirt, eyes open and empty, a hole in his chest. She waited to feel something. Relief. Satisfaction. Justice. Instead, she felt hollow, tired, like something had been carved out of her, and nothing had filled the space. "It's over," Thomas said. "Clara, it's over." She nodded, unable to speak. Thomas crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest and let the tears come. Not tears of grief exactly. Not tears of joy. Just tears that had been building for months, years, maybe her whole life. "I thought he was going to kill you," she choked out. "I thought I was going to lose everything again." "You didn't. We're still here. All of us. The barn can be rebuilt. Again." Thomas pulled back to look at her face. "Are you hurt?" "No." "The children? Shaken up, but safe." "Then we won." His hands cupped her face. "Clara, we won." She looked into his eyes, this man who had come back from the dead for her, who had fought beside her, who had never once wavered. "I killed for you," she whispered. "I shot him. I actually shot another human being." You defended yourself. You defended our family. Does that make it right? It makes it necessary. Thomas kissed her forehead. There's a difference between murder and protection. What you did was protection. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this moment marked an ending, not just a pause. That Crane's death meant freedom, not more running, not more looking over her shoulder. What happens now? She asked. Now we send for the sheriff. Tell him what happened. These men will face justice for what they did here today. And after? Thomas smiled, then a real smile that reached his eyes. After we get married, we raise our children. We rebuild our barn and our life and everything Crane tried to take from us. He kissed her gently. After we live. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later with a posse of 6 men. Clara told her story, all of it from the murder of her family in Ohio to Crane's attack on the ranch. Thomas corroborated everything. So did Ezra and the children. The 2 surviving attackers, faced with the choice between cooperating and hanging, told everything they knew. Crane had hired them in Cheyenne. He'd promised them good money to help him deal with a problem. They hadn't known they'd be burning barns and threatening children. Sounds like you had a good case for self-defense even before today, Sheriff Morgan said, reviewing Clara's account of the Ohio fire. I'll send word to the authorities back east. With Crane dead and his men talking should be enough to close the book on what happened to your family. Really? Clara could barely comprehend it. After all this time. Sometimes justice takes a while, but it usually gets there in the end. The sheriff left with his prisoners. The posse helped put out what remained of the barn fire. Neighbors who'd seen the smoke started arriving with offers of help, food, spare lumber. By nightfall, the immediate crisis was over. The children were in bed, exhausted from fear and tears. Ezra was watching over the property. Thomas and Clara sat alone in the kitchen, too drained to move, too relieved to sleep. I can't believe it's over, Clara said. Believe it. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. Crane's. Right before I pulled the trigger. That'll fade with time. Will it? Thomas took her hand. I killed men in the war. Good men, bad men, men who were just following orders, same as me. I see their faces sometimes too, but it gets easier. The nightmares come less often. The guilt softens into something you can live with. How? By remembering why you did it. Not for hate, not for revenge, for protection, for love. He squeezed her hand. You saved Lucy today. Maybe you saved all of us. That's what matters. Clara looked at their intertwined fingers, his scarred and calloused, hers scarred too now in different ways. I thought I came here to die, she said quietly. When I got off that train and you rejected me, I sat on that bench and thought maybe this is where it ends. Maybe this is where I finally stop fighting. I know. But then Lucy asked me to read her a story, and you offered me a job, and somehow I found a reason to keep going. She looked up at him. You gave me that, Thomas. You and your children. You gave me something to live for. You gave us the same thing. His voice was rough. We were surviving before you came, but we weren't living. You taught us how to live again. Clara leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into her bones. I want to get married, she said. Soon, before anything else can happen. How soon? Tomorrow. Thomas laughed, a real laugh, surprised and joyful. Tomorrow. Why not? Life's short. We've both learned that the hard way. I don't want to waste another day not being your wife. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face for doubt or uncertainty. Finding none. Tomorrow, it is then. Really? I'd marry you tonight if the preacher was awake. He kissed her slow and deep. I love you, Clara Whitmore. I love you too, Thomas Garrett. They sat in the kitchen until dawn, planning a wedding and a future, and all the ordinary beautiful things that had once seemed impossible. And when the sun rose over the smoke-stained ranch, Clara watched it with different eyes than she'd had the day before. The nightmare was over. The healing could begin. The wedding didn't happen tomorrow. It happened 3 days later, after the sheriff had taken official statements, after the doctor had checked everyone's injuries, after the initial shock had faded enough for Clara to think clearly. She woke that morning to Lucy jumping on her bed. "Wake up! Wake up! You're getting married today." Clara groaned and pulled the pillow over her head. 5 more minutes. "No. Harriet says you have to get ready. She's heating water for a bath, and Abby found wildflowers for your hair, and Mrs. Henderson brought a cake all the way from town and—" Clara yanked the pillow away and stared at the excited child. "Mrs. Henderson made a cake. She said it's the least she could do after you saved us all from the bad men." Lucy bounced again. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Why you love Papa?" "I do. But marriage is a big thing, Lucy. It changes everything." Lucy tilted her head, considering this with the gravity of a 6-year-old philosopher. "I think everything already changed when you came. Marriage is just making it official." Clara laughed despite herself. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. Nobody listens to me because I'm little." "I listen to you." Lucy beamed. "That's why I like you best." The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Harriet helped Clara into the dress Thomas had secretly bought in town. Simple blue cotton, nothing fancy, but new and clean and beautiful in its simplicity. Abby wove wildflowers into Clara's hair, while the twins argued about who got to carry the rings. "You're both carrying them," Clara finally declared. "1 ring each, problem solved." "But what if Daniel drops his?" "Then you'll pick it up and hand it to him like a gentleman." Samuel looked disgusted by this suggestion, but didn't argue further. George appeared at Clara's elbow, tugging on her sleeve. "Miss Clara." She knelt to his level. "Yes, sweetheart. After you marry Papa, do I call you Mama?" Clara's heart clenched. She looked at Harriet, who nodded slightly. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, George." "Miss Clara." "Mama, whatever you want. I'll answer to anything." George thought about this. "I think I'll call you Mama, because that's what you are now. You take care of us and love us and stay when things are scary." Clara pulled him into a hug, blinking back tears. "Then Mama it is. Don't cry. It's your happy day. These are happy tears." "That doesn't make sense." "It will when you're older." William found her just before the ceremony. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of her room, cleaned up and dressed in his Sunday best, looking more like the young man he was becoming than the boy he'd been. "Miss Clara, I don't know what to call you now." "Clara is fine." "That don't seem right. You're marrying my pa. What would you like to call me?" William shifted his weight. "Ma always wanted more children. She used to say she wished she'd had a sister to share secrets with growing up. I was thinking maybe—" He trailed off, embarrassed. "Maybe what?" "Maybe I could just call you Clara. Like a big sister almost, even though you're older than me." Clara's smile spread slowly across her face. "I never had a big brother. Thomas was younger than me." "Your brother?" "He died in the fire. He was 12. About your age, actually." William's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Me too. But you know what, I think he would have liked you. He was brave like you, always trying to be the man of the house, even though he was just a kid. I'm not brave. You jumped into a fight to protect your father. That's brave. I got knocked out in about 2 seconds. Doesn't matter. You tried. That's what counts." William ducked his head, but Clara could see the pleased flush on his cheeks. "Clara." "Yes. I'm glad you're staying. I didn't want to be glad at first. Felt like I was betraying Ma's memory somehow. But she would have liked you. I know she would have." Clara reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, William. That means more than you know." The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house. Pastor Reynolds had ridden out from town grumbling about the inconvenience, but secretly pleased to be part of such a romantic story. Half of Bitter Creek had found excuses to attend, crowding into the space until people were standing in doorways and looking through windows. Clara walked down the makeshift aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family to watch her take this step. But as she moved between the rows of neighbors and friends, she realized she wasn't alone at all. Ezra nodded at her from his spot by the door. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Sheriff Morgan stood at the back, arms crossed, keeping watch even at a wedding. And at the front, Thomas waited. He looked different in his good suit. Younger, somehow. Less burdened. The perpetual furrow between his brows had smoothed, and his eyes, those gray eyes that had looked at her with such coldness on the day they met, now held nothing but warmth. Clara reached him and took his hands. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "You look terrified." "I am terrified. I keep expecting something to go wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong." "You don't know that." "I do, actually." Clara squeezed his hands. "Because we've already faced the worst. Everything from here is just living." Pastor Reynolds cleared his throat. "If we could begin." The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows exchanged, rings, the pastor's blessing. Clara barely heard any of it. She was too focused on Thomas's face, on the way his voice cracked when he said, "I do," on the tears he didn't bother to hide when she said it back. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Thomas pulled her close and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The children erupted in cheers. Lucy shouted, "Finally!" at the top of her lungs. The twins made exaggerated gagging noises. George asked loudly if this meant they could have cake now. Clara laughed against Thomas's lips. "Welcome to the family," he said. "I've been part of this family since the day Lucy asked me to read her a story." True, but now it's official. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was food, more food than Clara had seen in months. Neighbors had brought dishes, gifts, bottles of whiskey and wine. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon people were dancing in the yard under the stars. Clara danced with Thomas, with William, with Ezra, with half the men of Bitter Creek. Her feet ached, and her cheeks hurt from smiling, and she couldn't remember ever being this happy. Lucy found her during a quiet moment pulling on her new mama's skirt. "Are you happy?" Clara scooped her up. "Very happy." "Even though bad things happened?" "Sometimes the best things come after the bad things, like flowers growing after a fire." Lucy considered this. "That's what happened with you. You grew here after your fire." Clara's arms tightened around the child. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what happened. I'm glad you grew here." "Me too, Lucy. Me too." The guests eventually departed, leaving the Garrett family alone with their new beginning. Harriet put the younger children to bed while Thomas walked the property, checking that everything was secure. Clara stood on the porch watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. Thomas joined her after a while, slipping his arm around her waist. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was thinking about the bench." "What bench?" "The one at the train station, where I sat after you rejected me, where I was ready to give up." Thomas tensed beside her. "Clara." "No, let me finish." She turned to face him. "I was thinking about how close I came to dying that night. How if Lucy hadn't found me, if she hadn't asked for a story, I probably would have frozen to death before morning." "I know. I think about it too. But here's the thing. I don't regret it. Any of it. Not the pain, not the fear, not even Crane's attack. Because all of it led here. To you. To the children. To this life." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "You almost died because of me. Because I was too broken to see what was right in front of me. We were both broken. We still are in some ways. But broken things can be mended. And sometimes the mended version is stronger than the original ever was." He kissed her forehead. "When did you become so philosophical?" I had a lot of time to think while I was freezing on that bench." Thomas laughed a real full laugh that Clara felt all the way to her toes. "I love you, Clara Garrett." "I love you too, Thomas Garrett." They stood together on the porch, two people who had found each other through tragedy and stubbornness, and the innocent request of a child watching the stars, and knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. 1 year later. Clara stood at the stove stirring a pot of stew while chaos erupted around her. The twins were chasing George through the house. Rose was banging a wooden spoon against the floor. Lucy was attempting to read her book aloud over all the noise, determined to improve her reading no matter the circumstances. "Samuel Thomas Garrett, if you knock over that lamp, so help me." The front door opened. Thomas walked in, covered in dust from a day of ranch work, and stopped dead. "What in tarnation is happening in here?" "Your children are happening." "They're your children too now." "Not when they're acting like wild animals, they're not." Thomas grinned and crossed to her, planting a kiss on her cheek, despite her protests about his dusty clothes. "Something smells good." "It's stew. It'll be ready in an hour if I can get these hellions under control." "I'll handle it." Thomas turned to the room and let out a whistle so sharp it made everyone freeze. "Outside. All of you. Now. Go help William with the horses." The children scattered suddenly, well-behaved, leaving Clara alone with Thomas and the quietly contented Rose. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make them listen with just a whistle." "Years of practice." He pulled her close, ignoring her half-hearted protests. "You look tired." "I am tired. I'm also happy. Both things can be true." "They usually are, in my experience." Clara leaned against him, letting herself rest for just a moment. "Letter came today. From Ohio." Thomas tensed. "And? Crane's brother was convicted. Murder, conspiracy, land fraud. He'll hang next month." "Good. The authorities also found records of what happened to my family's land. It was sold illegally after the fire. They're working to reclaim it." Thomas pulled back to look at her face. "Does that mean I could go back, claim my inheritance, start over in Ohio?" A shadow passed over Thomas's expression. "Is that what you want?" Clara pretended to consider it, watching fear flicker in her husband's eyes. Then she smiled. "Thomas Garrett, I spent 3 weeks on a train to get away from Ohio. I nearly froze to death on a bench in Wyoming. I shot a man to protect your children. Do you really think I'm going to leave all that behind for a piece of land I haven't seen in over a year?" The relief on his face was almost comical. "Just checking." "Idiot." "You're idiot." "Unfortunately, yes." He kissed her properly, then deep and slow, until Rose threw her wooden spoon at them in protest. That evening, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, Clara made her rounds. She tucked in Rose, who had finally stopped throwing things and settled into sleep. She checked on George, who was clutching his rag doll and murmuring about horses. She looked in on the twins, who had miraculously stopped fighting long enough to fall asleep in a tangle of limbs. Abby was reading by candlelight. Clara made her promise to blow it out soon, and Abby rolled her eyes, but agreed. William was on the porch, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" Clara asked, joining him. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different everything is from a year ago. Pa was barely talking. Harriet was running herself ragged. The little ones were scared all the time." He glanced at her. "And then you showed up." "I didn't do anything special." "You stayed. That's special enough." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just squeezed his shoulder and left him to his thoughts. Lucy was the last stop. The 6-year-old 7 now, Clara reminded herself, was supposed to be asleep. Instead, she was sitting up in bed, her book open on her lap. "You should be sleeping." "I know, but I had a question." "What question?" In the story, the brave little sparrow finds a new nest after her old one gets destroyed. Is that what happened to you? Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "Something like that." But the sparrow in the story had to build her new nest all by herself. You didn't. You found one that was already built. Is that a bad thing? Lucy shook her head. No, I think it's better. Because you didn't just find a nest. You found a family. And families are better than nests. Clara pulled her daughter close. You're absolutely right. I know. I'm very wise. And humble. What's humble? Never mind. Go to sleep. Will you read to me first? Lucy, it's late. Please. Just one chapter. Like you did that first night when you were cold and sad and I found you at the station. Clara looked at this child who had saved her life with 5 simple words. This fierce, wise, wonderful girl who had looked at a dying stranger and seen someone worth saving. All right, one chapter. She picked up the book, The Brave Little Sparrow, worn now from countless readings, and began. Thomas found them an hour later, both asleep, the book fallen between them. He picked it up carefully, marked the page, and set it on the bedside table. Then he covered them both with a quilt and stood watching for a long moment. His wife, his daughter, his family whole, in a way it hadn't been since Martha died. He'd thought love was something you only got once. That when you lost it, the loss was permanent. He'd been wrong. Love wasn't finite. It wasn't something that ran out. It was something that grew, that changed, that found new forms even after the old ones were destroyed. Clara Whitmore had arrived on his doorstep looking like death walking. Now she was the most alive person he knew. Thomas kissed his daughter's forehead, then his wife's. Clara stirred, but didn't wake. He left them to their dreams and walked out onto the porch where the Wyoming stars blazed overhead, and the future stretched out before him full of possibility. 3 years later. The Garrett Ranch had expanded. New barn, new fences, new outbuildings. Thomas had bought the neighboring property when Old Man Jenkins passed, doubling their acreage. Business was good, life was good, but the biggest change was running toward Clara across the yard right now, her dark curls bouncing her gray eyes. Thomas's eyes, bright with excitement. Mama, Mama, look what I found. Martha, named for the woman who had come before, honored by the daughter who came after, skidded to a stop in front of Clara, her small hands cupped around something. What is it, sweetheart? Martha opened her hands to reveal a tiny sparrow, its wing bent at an awkward angle. It's hurt. Can we fix it? Clara knelt and examined the bird, still breathing, still fighting. We can try, she said. Lucy says hurt things can get better if someone loves them enough. Is that true? Clara looked at her youngest daughter. This child she'd never expected to have, this miracle born of a second chance at love. Yes, she said. That's absolutely true. She gathered Martha in her arms, bird and all, and carried her toward the house where the rest of the family was waiting. Thomas at the door. Lucy, with her nose in a book. William, nearly a man, now helping Ezra with the horses. Harriet engaged to the pastor's son, planning her own future. The twins lanky and loud and finally getting along. George still clutching his rag doll, though he'd never admit it. Abby teaching Rose to read on the porch. And baby James, barely a year-old, Thomas's image in miniature, napping in his cradle by the fire. Her family. All of them. Clara thought about the woman she'd been sitting on that frozen bench in Wyoming waiting to die. She thought about Lucy's small hand in hers asking for a story. She thought about Thomas's cruelty and his kindness and everything that came after. She thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments could lead to the best ones, how death could transform into life, grief into joy, rejection into belonging. Mama, Martha tugged on her sleeve. Why are you crying? Happy tears, sweetheart. That still doesn't make sense. It will, someday. When you find your own nest after losing everything. When you build a family from nothing but hope and stubbornness. When you learn that endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Clara kissed her daughter's head and walked into her home surrounded by the noise and chaos and love that had grown from one simple question on a frozen winter night. "Can you read me a story?" The answer, it turned out, had been the beginning of the greatest story of all, and Clara Garrett, who had once been ready to die, was finally completely beautifully alive.